I wasn't supposed to be at my grandmother's 90th birthday dinner. The family group chat made that clear. Maybe Victoria shouldn't come. Her situation is complicated. Complicated. That's what they called my Navy career that had taken me from seaman recruit to commanding the 7th Fleet. But I came anyway. Not to prove anything to the family that saw me as jobless, but to honor the woman who taught me that storms don't last forever. So I sat quietly while they celebrated my sister Melissa's Navy career. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from. And if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed. Because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. Until her Admiral looked across the table and asked the question that would destroy everything they thought they knew. I hadn't been home for a family gathering in 5 years. Not since the intervention dinner, where they'd all sat me down and told me it was time to get serious about my life and stop playing sailor. My father, Senator Robert Sterling, had been particularly brutal. Victoria, you're 38 years old. While Melissa is building a respectable naval career as a medical officer, you're still bouncing between deployments with no real direction. It's time to grow up. Growing up. As if commanding destroyers and coordinating multinational naval operations was somehow less mature than what they considered real work. But in the Sterling family, success was measured by how well you fit their narrow definition of respectability. My sister Melissa had always been the golden child, Harvard Medical School, Navy medical officer, rising through the ranks in ways that made perfect sense to our politically connected family. She saved lives, attended military medical conferences that Dad could brag about at Senate committee meetings, and looked impressive in her dress whites at official functions. Then there was me, the daughter who'd enlisted straight out of high school instead of going to an Ivy League college. The one who'd chosen what Dad called grunt work over the prestige careers he'd mapped out for both his daughters. He'd expected me to wash out of boot camp and come crawling back. Instead, I'd thrived in ways he refused to understand. The family group chat message had come 2 weeks ago, buried in a thread about Grandma Rose's milestone birthday celebration. Maybe Victoria shouldn't come. Her situation is complicated right now. My brother-in-law had typed it, but I knew it came from Dad. They thought I was between jobs again, living off savings from my last deployment, probably struggling to make rent. What they didn't know was that I'd been deliberately vague about my current assignment for operational security reasons. For the past 18 months, I'd been serving as commander of the 7th Fleet, overseeing naval operations across the entire Western Pacific. My decisions affected everything from freedom of navigation patrols to humanitarian disaster response. But to my family, I was just Victoria who, quote, couldn't hold down a real job. The birthday dinner was being held at the Belmont Country Club, the same venue where Dad had celebrated every major political victory. The guest list included 3 admirals, a handful of congressional colleagues, and enough military brass to sink a small ship. All there to honor Grandma Rose, the family matriarch who'd somehow managed to love me unconditionally despite Dad's disappointment. Melissa would be there with her husband, Admiral James Crawford, her commanding officer, and the man she'd met during her residency at Bethesda Naval Hospital. Crawford was everything Dad respected. Annapolis graduate, distinguished service record, the kind of military leader who looked good in newspaper photos with senators. I'd received exactly one personal invitation to the dinner, and it hadn't come from my family. Grandma Rose had called me directly on my flagship's secure line. Victoria, darling, I don't care what your father says about complicated situations. It's my birthday, and I want all my granddaughters there. I'd tried to explain that my current assignment made it difficult to attend social functions, but she'd cut me off. Nonsense. Whatever job you're doing, they can spare you for one evening to celebrate an old woman's birthday. If only she knew that sparing me required coordinating with Pacific Fleet Command and ensuring my deputy could handle any crisis that might arise in the South China Sea while I was gone. But I was going anyway. Not because I needed their approval or wanted to prove anything about my career. I was going because Grandma Rose had been the only family member who'd ever asked about my service with genuine interest, who'd listened when I talked about the challenges of command, who'd understood that my work mattered even if the rest of the family didn't. Tonight I would sit at their table as the family disappointment one last time. Let them think whatever they wanted about my complicated situation. Some truths were worth keeping to yourself. The flight from Pearl Harbor to Reagan National took 13 hours, giving me plenty of time to plan my approach. I couldn't simply arrive as Admiral Victoria Sterling. Too many questions, too much attention, and honestly, too much satisfaction in watching my family's shocked faces before I was ready to deal with the consequences. Instead, I needed to be invisible. Someone who could attend the dinner without drawing notice, blend into the background of military officers and political figures, observe without being observed. 22 years of naval service had taught me that sometimes the most effective command decisions were made by leaders who could move undetected through situations others couldn't navigate. My first stop in Washington was a salon in Georgetown, far from any places my family might frequent. The stylist transformed my regulation navy cut into long, loose waves that softened my features completely. Civilian clothes came next. A simple black dress, modest jewelry, low heels that looked elegant but wouldn't mark me as military. Contact lenses changed my eye color from green to brown, and subtle makeup aged me slightly, while hiding the command bearing I'd developed over 2 decades of service. The hardest part was adjusting my entire presence. Fleet Command had trained me to fill any room I entered, to project authority through posture and voice. Tonight, I needed to become forgettable. A military spouse, perhaps, or a staff member from one of the congressional offices. Someone with legitimate reason to be at a high-level military social function, but unremarkable enough to avoid scrutiny. My cover story was simple and believable. I was Elena Rodriguez, a liaison officer from the State Department's Office of Maritime Affairs. The credentials were genuine. A favor from a colleague who owed me from a joint operation we'd coordinated last year. My presence at a dinner honoring a senator's mother, attended by senior naval officers, would seem perfectly natural. The persona required a complete mindset shift. Elena would be quietly professional, interested in policy implications of naval operations but not operationally knowledgeable herself. She'd ask thoughtful questions about diplomatic aspects of maritime security while staying clear of tactical details. She'd be the kind of government professional who attended these functions to maintain relationships, but rarely drew attention to herself. I practiced the voice during the taxi ride to Belmont Country Club. Softer tone, less command authority, the careful diction of a career diplomat rather than a fleet commander. Elena spoke like someone who influenced through negotiation rather than orders, who built consensus rather than making decisive calls under fire. The country club looked exactly as I remembered from childhood visits. Imposing brick facade, manicured grounds, the kind of understated elegance that screamed old money and political influence. Valets directed luxury vehicles while security discreetly checked credentials. This was my family's world, the environment where they felt most comfortable displaying their achievements and connections. Inside, the private dining room buzzed with the energy of powerful people enjoying themselves. I recognized faces from news programs and military publications, admirals I'd worked with professionally, senators from Dad's committees, defense contractors who'd briefed me on new technologies. Any one of them could potentially recognize me if they looked too closely. I collected my place card and found my assigned seat at a table near the back. Perfect positioning for someone who was supposed to be unimportant. Close enough to observe but far enough from the head table to avoid drawing attention from the guest of honor or the family. Imasa Maumaheli Southering. Then I saw them gathering near the front of the room. Dad, distinguished and commanding even in civilian clothes, working the room like the seasoned politician he was. Melissa in elegant navy blue, her medical officer insignia catching the light as she spoke with senior naval officers. And Admiral Crawford, impressive in his dress whites, every inch the respected flag officer my family admired. They looked successful, accomplished, completely unaware that the family disappointment they'd excluded was sitting 30 feet away, planning to observe their celebration while remaining invisible. Tonight, Elena Rodriguez would be a perfect guest. Admiral Victoria Sterling would remain hidden, at least until I decided otherwise. The dinner proceeded with military precision. Grandma Rose held court at the head table, radiant at 90, and clearly enjoying every moment of being surrounded by admirals and senators who hung on her every word. She'd always been the family's secret weapon, the one person who could make Dad laugh, who could charm visiting dignitaries. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. Who somehow managed to keep our fractured family connected despite years of disappointment and miscommunication. I watched from my distant table as the speeches began. Dad spoke about family legacy and service, his voice carrying the practiced cadence of someone accustomed to addressing crowds. Melissa was introduced to warm applause, her achievements as a naval medical officer recited with obvious pride. No mention was made of the absent daughter, the one whose complicated situation had kept her away from this celebration. As the formal program concluded and guests began mingling, I prepared to make my quiet exit. I'd seen what I came to see. Grandma Rose looking healthy and happy, my family thriving in their element, the sterling name still carrying weight in military and political circles. Elena Rodriguez could slip away unnoticed, and Admiral Victoria Sterling could return to her fleet with the knowledge that some bridges were permanently burned. That's when Admiral Crawford approached my table. "Excuse me," he said with the polished courtesy of a senior officer. "You're Elena Rodriguez from State Maritime Affairs, correct?" I nodded, staying in character. "Yes, Admiral Crawford. Congratulations on the recent 7th Fleet exercises. The diplomatic coordination was exceptional." Something flickered in his eyes. Surprise, perhaps, or recognition. "Thank you. Not many State Department liaisons follow tactical fleet operations that closely." "Maritime security is increasingly complex," I replied carefully. "Understanding operational capabilities helps us better coordinate with international partners." Crawford studied my face with an intensity that made my pulse quicken. He was clearly trying to place something, a voice, a mannerism, some detail that didn't quite fit Elena Rodriguez's carefully constructed persona. "You know," he said slowly, "you remind me of someone I've been hearing quite a lot about in Pacific Fleet circles." My blood turned cold. Crawford worked closely with Pacific Fleet Command. He would know exactly who commanded the 7th Fleet, would have attended briefings where my decisions were discussed and implemented. If anyone could see through my disguise, it would be him. "Oh?" I managed, keeping my tone neutral. "Admiral Victoria Sterling. Remarkable officer. Youngest fleet commander in the Pacific, running operations that span half the globe. She's revolutionized how we coordinate multinational naval exercises." He paused, his gaze becoming more focused. Brilliant tactical mind, known for her ability to anticipate challenges before they develop. I felt trapped, exposed despite my careful preparation. "I'm afraid I don't know anyone by that name, Admiral." "Really?" "Because Admiral Sterling has a very distinctive approach to strategic thinking. She's known for gathering intelligence before making moves, for understanding all the players in a situation before revealing her own position." His voice dropped slightly. "Exactly the kind of skills someone would need to attend a family function without being recognized." The noise of the reception seemed to fade around us. Crawford knew. Somehow, impossibly, he'd seen through Elena Rodriguez's carefully constructed cover and identified the fleet commander hiding beneath. "Admiral Crawford," I said quietly, "I think there's been some confusion." "No confusion," he interrupted gently. "I've worked with enough senior naval officers to recognize command presence, even when someone's trying to hide it. Plus, the way you discussed the 7th Fleet exercises, that wasn't briefing book knowledge. That was operational insight from someone who planned and executed those operations." He leaned closer, lowering his voice to just above a whisper. "The question is, why would the commander of the 7th Fleet need to attend her own grandmother's birthday dinner in disguise?" Before I could respond, he continued. "And more importantly, why doesn't your family have any idea who you really are?" I looked across the room at Melissa, who was laughing with a group of medical officers, completely unaware that her jobless sister was sitting 30 feet away commanding more naval assets than any other officer in the Pacific. "Because they never asked," I said simply. Before Admiral Crawford could probe deeper into my identity, Melissa appeared at our table. her face bright with the kind of smile she reserved for impressing senior officers. "Admiral Crawford," she said warmly, "I hope you're enjoying the dinner. Have you met Elena Rodriguez from the State Department? She's been asking very insightful questions about our maritime operations." Crawford looked between Melissa and me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Actually, Ms. Rodriguez and I were just discussing fleet coordination in the Pacific. She seems remarkably well informed about 7th Fleet operations." Melissa's smile faltered slightly as she processed the Admiral's tone. Something in his voice suggested deeper meaning, but she couldn't grasp what it was. "That's interesting," Melissa said carefully. "Elena, have you worked extensively with Pacific Fleet Command?" "To some degree," I replied, maintaining Elena's diplomatic voice. "Maritime security requires close coordination between State and Defense Department operations." "Speaking of coordination," Crawford interjected, his eyes never leaving my face, "Elena was just telling me about her familiarity with Admiral Victoria Sterling's command style. Fascinating insights about leadership in complex multinational environments." The color drained from Melissa's face. She stared at me for a long moment, her medical training warring with disbelief as she processed what Crawford had just revealed. "Victoria Sterling?" she whispered. "But that's impossible. Victoria is my sister, and she doesn't." She trailed off, confusion replacing her earlier confidence. "Your sister?" Crawford's eyebrows rose in genuine surprise. "Melissa, are you telling me you don't know what Victoria does for the Navy?" "Of course I know," Melissa said defensively. "She's been bouncing between different assignments for years. Surface warfare, logistics coordination, training commands. Dad says she's never found her real calling, that she's basically a career enlisted person who somehow got officer rank but never advanced to anything significant." The silence that followed was deafening. Crawford stared at Melissa in disbelief, while I felt the familiar sting of family dismissal that had followed me for 2 decades. "Melissa," Crawford said slowly, "your sister commands the 7th Fleet. She's responsible for naval operations across the entire Western Pacific. She oversees 40 ships, 200 aircraft, and 20,000 personnel." Melissa's legs gave out and she sank into the chair beside me. "That's not possible. Victoria she's struggling. She's between jobs again. Dad said her last assignment ended badly, and she's been living off savings while looking for something stable." "When was the last time you actually asked Victoria about her career?" Crawford pressed. "When did you last have a real conversation about what she does?" Melissa's eyes filled with tears as the implications hit her. We. Dad always said she was embarrassing the family name by refusing to take her career seriously. He said she was wasting her potential, that she'd never amount to anything because she wasn't committed to excellence like— She looked at me with dawning horror. "Like I was." I pulled off Elena's wig, letting my shorter naval regulation cut show. "Hello, Melissa." "Oh my God," she breathed. "Victoria, you're really here. But why didn't you tell us? Why let us think you were struggling?" "Because no one ever asked what I was actually doing," I said quietly. "Every time I tried to share anything about my assignments, Dad would change the subject or make it clear that my work wasn't worth discussing." Crawford stood, his expression stern. "Melissa, your sister doesn't just command the 7th Fleet. She's been nominated for promotion to Vice Admiral. She's one of the most respected naval officers in the Pacific Theater." Melissa looked between Crawford and me, processing information that shattered everything she'd believed about our family dynamics. "But Dad said, he told everyone you were a disappointment, that you'd never achieved anything meaningful. Your father," Crawford said carefully, "has been seriously misinformed about his daughter's career. Victoria, I think it's time your family learned who you really are." "Wait," I said, studying Crawford's expression more carefully. "Admiral, you didn't just recognize me by chance, did you? You knew I'd be here tonight." Crawford's diplomatic mask slipped slightly. "What makes you say that?" "Because you approached my table specifically," I said, my command training taking over. "You didn't just happen to strike up a conversation with Elena Rodriguez. You sought me out. And you knew exactly how to draw out information about my real identity." Melissa looked between us, confusion evident on her face. "What are you talking about?" I stood, moving into a position where I could see the entire room while keeping both Crawford and Melissa in view. Admiral, I've spent 22 years learning to read tactical situations. You didn't come to this dinner just to celebrate my grandmother's birthday. You're here for a reason that involves me. Crawford sighed, glancing around the reception to ensure we weren't being overheard. You're right, this isn't a social call. Can we step somewhere more private? There are things you both need to know. We followed him through French doors onto a quiet balcony overlooking the country club's golf course. The evening air was cool, and the distant sounds of the dinner felt muted and far away. 2 weeks ago, Crawford began, I received a request from Naval Intelligence. They're investigating irregularities in fleet logistics contracts, specifically unauthorized modifications to procurement procedures that have resulted in substandard equipment being purchased at inflated prices. My stomach dropped. What does this have to do with my family? The investigation started when maintenance crews discovered counterfeit parts in critical ship systems across multiple Pacific Fleet vessels. When they traced the procurement chain, they found that technical specifications had been altered after being approved by engineering officers. Melissa frowned. Altered how? Material requirements downgraded, quality standards reduced, vendor certifications bypassed, always in ways that favored specific suppliers who happened to charge premium prices for inferior products. Crawford looked directly at me. Victoria, every ship in your fleet that received these compromised parts had one thing in common. They'd recently implemented new maintenance protocols that your family's consulting firm had helped develop. I felt like I'd been hit by a torpedo. What consulting firm? Sterling Maritime Solutions, Crawford said. Founded 18 months ago by your father and brother-in-law. They specialize in advising defense contractors on naval procurement processes. Melissa's face went white. That's impossible. My husband doesn't know anything about naval procurement. He's a medical officer. But he has access to someone who does, Crawford said quietly. Someone with intimate knowledge of fleet operations, maintenance schedules, and equipment vulnerabilities. Someone whose credentials would give weight to any technical recommendations. The pieces fell into place with sickening clarity. They've been using my name, I said. My reputation, my position, my access to classified information. We believe so. Sterling Maritime Solutions has been billing itself as having, quote, direct advisory relationships with senior Pacific Fleet commanders. Their client presentations include detailed knowledge of fleet operations that could only come from someone with your level of access. I stared at Crawford, the implications hitting me like depth charges. You think my family has been selling classified fleet information to defense contractors? I think someone has been systematically exploiting your position to defraud the Navy while compromising the safety of ships under your command. Crawford's voice was grim. The question is whether your family members are willing participants or unwitting tools. Melissa sank into one of the balcony chairs. This can't be happening. My husband wouldn't. He's dedicated his career to serving. Melissa, I said gently, when did James start asking questions about my assignments? About my access to fleet operations? Her face crumpled as she remembered. About 2 years ago, right after you took command of the 7th Fleet. He suddenly became interested in your work, asking about ship maintenance cycles, procurement timelines, equipment testing protocols. She looked up at me with horror. He said he was proud of your achievements and wanted to understand them better. Crawford nodded grimly. The same time frame when Sterling Maritime Solutions started winning high-value consulting contracts. Admiral, I said, if my family has been using my position to commit fraud, sailors under my command could die because of compromised equipment. 3 near-miss incidents in the past 6 months, Crawford confirmed. Engine failures, radar malfunctions, communication breakdowns. All traced back to parts that should never have passed quality control. I looked through the balcony doors at the dinner continuing inside, where my father was probably holding court about family honor and service, completely unaware that his other daughter was about to investigate him for treason. What do you need from me? I asked. Before Crawford could answer my question, the balcony door opened and James stepped outside, his dress whites immaculate, his smile warm and familiar. But something in his eyes had changed, a calculation I'd never noticed before. "There you are, darling," he said to Melissa, then nodded to Crawford. "Admiral." "And Elena, isn't it? From the State Department?" Crawford's hand moved almost imperceptibly toward his service weapon. "Actually, James, I'd like you to meet Admiral Victoria Sterling, Melissa's sister." James's smile never wavered, but I saw his pupils dilate slightly, a stress response I'd learned to recognize during interrogations of captured enemy personnel. "Victoria?" He looked at me with perfectly calibrated surprise. "My God, what are you doing here? And why are you—" He gestured at my disguise. "Why the false identity? Why don't you tell us?" I said, dropping Elena's voice and letting my command authority show. "Since you've been so interested in my career lately." James laughed, but it sounded forced. "I don't understand. Interested how?" "Sterling Maritime Solutions," Crawford said flatly. "Your consulting firm that's been using Victoria's position and reputation to sell classified fleet information to defense contractors." "That's absurd," James replied, but his eyes darted between Crawford and me, calculating angles and exit strategies. "Our firm provides legitimate advisory services based on publicly available information and James's medical expertise." "Cut the bullshit," I said, stepping closer. "James, sailors under my command are dying because of compromised equipment your clients are selling to the Navy. Equipment that passed inspection because someone with inside knowledge helped them game the system." Melissa stood, her face pale but her voice steady. "James, tell them this is all a misunderstanding. Tell them you would never compromise fleet safety." James looked at his wife with something that might have been pity. "Melissa, sweetheart, you have no idea how the real world works. Your sister commands a multi-billion-dollar operation, and she gets paid a fraction of what private sector executives make for managing far less. So you decided to monetize my position without my knowledge," I said. "I decided to help this family achieve the financial security we deserve," James shot back. "Do you have any idea what defense contractors pay for advanced knowledge of procurement decisions? What foreign governments offer for insights into American naval capabilities?" Crawford's weapon was now partially drawn. "Foreign governments?" James's mask finally slipped completely. "The Chinese Maritime Ministry has been very generous in compensating us for technical assessments of Pacific Fleet vulnerabilities. Amazing what they'll pay to understand maintenance cycles, communication protocols, operational patterns." Melissa staggered backward. "You're selling military secrets to China?" "I'm providing consulting services to international clients who want to understand American naval capabilities," James corrected. "It's called business." "It's called treason," I said. "James, how long has this been going on?" "Since about 6 months after you took fleet command," he replied with shocking casualness. "Your promotion created opportunities that were too valuable to ignore." Crawford spoke into his caller radio. "Bravo team, balcony now. We have a confirmed hostile." "Oh, Admiral Crawford," James said, his tone shifting to something darker. "I'm afraid your team is currently dealing with a security emergency in the main dining room. Seems someone called in a bomb threat. Strange timing, don't you think?" My blood ran cold. "You planned this. You knew I'd be here tonight." "We've been monitoring your communications for months," James confirmed. "We knew you'd eventually show up for family obligations. Tonight was just convenient timing. Lots of senior officers in one place. Perfect cover for what comes next." "What comes next?" Melissa whispered. James pulled out his phone and showed us a timer counting down. "In 15 minutes, there's going to be a tragic accident. Gas leak explosion. Very sad. Unfortunately, several senior naval officers will be killed, including the troublesome Admiral Sterling, who's been asking too many questions about procurement irregularities." Crawford had his weapon fully drawn now. "James, you're under arrest for treason, espionage, and conspiracy to commit murder." The balcony door opened again, but this time it wasn't another enemy. Grandma Rose stepped outside, her elegant evening gown replaced with dark clothing and a small electronic device in her weathered hand. Her usual gentle demeanor had been replaced by something I'd never seen before, steely determination mixed with deadly competence. "That's enough, James," she said quietly, her voice carrying an authority that made everyone freeze. James spun around, his face going pale. Rose? What are you doing here? What I should have done months ago, she replied, holding up the device. Stopping this family from destroying itself and everyone around it. Crawford stared at my grandmother in shock, but I was beginning to understand. Grandma, you've been investigating this. She looked at me with eyes that suddenly seemed much sharper than her 90 years should have allowed. Victoria, darling, I've been investigating this since the day James started asking suspicious questions about your work. From her small purse, she pulled out a thick envelope. Phone records, financial documents, copies of classified information James photographed in your father's study, audio recordings of planning meetings with Chinese operatives. James backed against the balcony railing. You can't have been recording us, you're just a harmless old woman. Harmless? Grandma Rose smiled, but it wasn't her usual warm expression. James, I spent 40 years married to a Navy intelligence officer. I know surveillance when I see it, and I know treason when it's happening in my own family. She turned to Crawford. Admiral, the device James is holding isn't connected to any explosives. I had naval intelligence techs replace it with a dummy 6 hours ago. That's impossible, James said, but his voice had lost its confident edge. Grandma Rose held up her own device. This is the real detonator, James. And I've already disabled all the charges you placed throughout the building. Crawford spoke into his radio. All teams, Grandma Rose has secured the situation. Move in now. Grandma Rose? I stared at my grandmother with new understanding. You're working with naval intelligence? Have been for 18 months, she confirmed. Ever since I realized James was using family gatherings to gather intelligence about your career. I contacted my late husband's old colleagues when I suspected foreign involvement. Melissa looked between her husband and grandmother, overwhelmed. You've been spying on us? I've been protecting this family, Grandma Rose corrected, and protecting the sailors whose lives James was endangering with his greed. She walked over to me, her expression softening slightly. Victoria, I've been so proud of you. Every promotion, every commendation, every time your name appeared in intelligence briefings, you became everything this family should have been. You knew about my real position? I asked. I've known since the day you took fleet command, she said. I have contacts throughout the Navy, dear. They kept me informed about your remarkable career while your father remained willfully ignorant. Crawford moved to arrest James, but my brother-in-law made one last desperate play. You think this is over? The Chinese have backup plans. Victoria's fleet is already compromised. Tonight was just the beginning. Actually, Grandma Rose said calmly, your Chinese contacts were arrested 3 hours ago. Turns out they've been under FBI surveillance since they first approached your consulting firm. She looked at James with something approaching pity. You weren't running a sophisticated espionage operation, dear. You were pawns in a counterintelligence sting designed to map Chinese naval intelligence networks. Federal agents burst onto the balcony, surrounding James as Crawford read him his rights. As they led him away, he looked back at Melissa with what might have been regret. I was trying to give you the life you deserved, he said. The life I deserved, Melissa replied quietly, was one where my husband didn't betray everything I swore to protect. Grandma Rose put her arms around both Melissa and me. Well, that's finished. Now we can focus on rebuilding this family properly. I looked at her with amazement. How long have you been protecting me? Since the day you were born, darling. I just had to get more creative about it recently. As James was led away in handcuffs, Crawford turned to me with a grim expression. Victoria, we're not done yet. James was just the operational level. This conspiracy goes much deeper. What do you mean? I asked. Your father, Senator Sterling, has been the political cover for this entire operation. Sterling Maritime Solutions couldn't have accessed the level of classified information they were selling without someone providing high-level political protection. The words hit me like a depth charge. Dad's involved? We believe he's been using his position on the Senate Armed Services Committee to shield the consulting firm from scrutiny while providing legislative intelligence about upcoming defense appropriations. Melissa gasped. That's impossible. Dad built his career on military oversight. He would never compromise national security. Melissa, Grandma Rose said gently. Your father has been struggling financially for years. Campaign debts, legal fees from ethics investigations, declining political influence. James offered him a way to monetize his committee position. Crawford checked his watch. Right now, your father is inside making a toast to family honor and naval tradition. In 15 minutes, FBI agents are going to arrest him for conspiracy and treason. The question is, do we let that happen publicly, humiliating your family and destroying his political legacy, or do we give him the chance to surrender quietly? I looked through the balcony doors at Dad, resplendent in his tailored suit, commanding attention as he always had. He was telling some story about military service and sacrifice, completely unaware that his political career was about to end in disgrace. There's something else, Crawford continued. If your father is arrested tonight, it triggers a dead man's switch in the Chinese intelligence network. They have contingency plans that involve targeting other fleet commanders' families. You mean if Dad goes down, other people get hurt? I asked. We're talking about a coordinated campaign to eliminate or compromise senior Pacific Fleet leadership. Your arrest would be just the beginning. Grandma Rose stepped forward. Victoria, there's another option. Your father could quietly resign from the Senate, claim health issues, and cooperate with the investigation in exchange for reduced charges. But that means letting him escape real consequences, Melissa said. It means protecting innocent people while still achieving justice, Crawford replied. Sometimes command decisions aren't about what's satisfying. They're about what's necessary. I stood at the balcony railing, watching my father hold court inside, torn between personal anger and professional responsibility. He dismissed my career for 2 decades while using my position to commit treason. Part of me wanted to see him dragged away in handcuffs in front of all his political allies. But I was also a fleet commander responsible for the safety of thousands of sailors. If my personal desire for justice endangered other military families, what kind of leader did that make me? There's more, Crawford said quietly. The Chinese operatives James was working with weren't just gathering intelligence. They were mapping vulnerabilities in Pacific Fleet families, identifying which officers could be targeted through their loved ones. He showed me photos on his phone, surveillance images of other fleet commanders' children, spouses, elderly parents. They've been building a comprehensive targeting list. If this operation is exposed publicly tonight, they'll activate their contingency plans before we can protect all the potential victims. I looked at Melissa, whose medical training had taught her to prioritize saving lives over personal satisfaction. What do you think? I think, she said slowly, that some prices are too high to pay even for justice. Grandma Rose nodded approvingly. Sometimes protecting people means making choices that feel wrong in the moment but are right in the long term. Crawford spoke into his radio. Bravo team, hold positions. We're going with option 2. I took a deep breath, making the hardest command decision of my career. Let's go talk to Dad. The choice wasn't between right and wrong. It was between different kinds of right and different kinds of cost. We found Dad in the country club's library, away from the celebration, speaking quietly on his phone. When he saw us approach, Crawford in uniform, me without my disguise, Grandma Rose carrying her envelope of evidence, his face went ashen. I'll call you back, he said into the phone, ending the conversation abruptly. Hello, Dad, I said quietly. We need to talk. He looked between us, his political instincts clearly recognizing a crisis situation. Victoria? What are you doing here? And Admiral Crawford, is everything all right? Senator Sterling, Crawford said formally. We need to discuss Sterling Maritime Solutions and your involvement in selling classified naval intelligence to foreign operatives. Dad's composure cracked for just a moment before his politician's mask reasserted itself. I'm afraid I don't know what you're talking about, Admiral. Grandma Rose stepped forward and placed the envelope on the library table. Jonathan, I have recordings of your conversations with James about defense appropriations. I have photographs of you meeting with Chinese intelligence operatives. I have bank records showing payments from shell companies tied to foreign governments. Mother, you don't understand. I understand perfectly, she interrupted. You've been selling out your country for money, while dismissing the daughter who's actually been serving it with honor. Dad turned to me, his expression shifting from denial to desperation. Victoria, you have to understand. The political climate has changed. Campaign costs have skyrocketed. I needed resources to maintain influence, to continue serving the people who elected me. By betraying the people who trusted you with national security, I replied. By finding creative solutions to impossible financial pressures, he shot back. Do you have any idea what it costs to maintain political relevance in today's environment? Crawford spoke quietly. Senator, we know about the Chinese payments. We know about the classified appropriations information you provided. We know about your role in protecting Sterling Maritime Solutions from oversight. Dad sank into one of the leather chairs, the weight of exposure finally hitting him. How long have you known? 18 months, Crawford replied. You've been under surveillance since the first suspicious transaction. Then why wait until now? Because we needed to map the entire network, I said. Dad, this wasn't just about you taking bribes. This was about foreign intelligence services systematically compromising American naval capabilities. Grandma Rose sat across from him. Jonathan, sailors have died because of equipment failures caused by the intelligence you sold. Good young men and women whose families will never know their deaths were preventable. Dad's face crumpled. I never meant for anyone to get hurt. It was supposed to be harmless information. Appropriations timelines, procurement schedules, administrative details. There's no such thing as harmless intelligence when you're dealing with hostile foreign powers, Crawford said. Every piece of information you provided gave our enemies advantages that cost American lives. I watched my father grapple with the full scope of his betrayal. For the first time in my adult life, he looked small, defeated, stripped of the commanding presence that had intimidated me since childhood. What happens now? He asked quietly. You have a choice, Crawford replied. You can be arrested publicly tonight in front of 300 of your closest political allies and face the full consequences of a treason prosecution. Or you can quietly resign from the Senate tomorrow, citing health concerns, and cooperate fully with our investigation in exchange for reduced charges. Dad looked at me with something that might have been hope. What do you recommend, Victoria? For a moment, I felt the weight of 22 years of dismissal and disappointment. But I also felt the responsibility of command, the knowledge that my decision would affect more than just our family. I recommend, I said slowly, that you choose to protect the other military families your actions have endangered, even if it means you don't pay the full price you deserve. The Chinese have contingency plans, Crawford explained. If this becomes public tonight, other fleet commanders' families become targets. Dad nodded slowly, understanding finally dawning. You want me to fall on my sword quietly to protect innocent people. I want you to finally do the right thing, I said. Even if no one will ever know you did it. 2 years later, I stood on the bridge of my flagship in Pearl Harbor, watching the sunrise paint the Pacific in shades of gold and crimson. The morning briefing had brought good news. The last Chinese intelligence network connected to Sterling Maritime Solutions had been dismantled, and fleet security protocols had been completely overhauled. Dad had kept his word. He'd resigned from the Senate quietly, citing health concerns, and spent 18 months in federal custody providing intelligence that helped dismantle the broader espionage network. His cooperation had prevented attacks on dozens of military families and exposed Chinese operations across the entire Pacific region. He was serving the remainder of his sentence under house arrest, writing a memoir about the corrupting influence of money in politics. It would never be published, part of his plea agreement, but the process seemed to give him something approaching peace. Melissa had transferred to Walter Reed, where she was developing new trauma protocols for sailors injured by compromised equipment. Her work had already saved dozens of lives, transforming her guilt into a force for healing. She'd started a foundation supporting families of service members killed by defective equipment, turning her personal tragedy into a mission of redemption. My phone buzzed with a message from her. Family dinner Sunday? Grandma Rose is making her famous pot roast. I smiled, remembering how family dinners used to be exercises in disappointment and judgment. Now they were quiet affairs, where we actually talked to each other, where achievements were celebrated regardless of whether they fit anyone's preconceived notions of success. Admiral Crawford approached, carrying a sealed envelope. "Victoria, this just came from the Pentagon." I opened it carefully, then looked up at him in surprise. "Promotion to Vice Admiral?" "And reassignment to Pacific Fleet Command," he confirmed. "Congratulations, Admiral Sterling." The rank felt surreal. 2 years ago, my family had thought I was jobless. Now I was being elevated to oversee naval operations across the entire Pacific Ocean. "There's something else," Crawford continued. "The Secretary of the Navy wants to present your new stars at a ceremony in Washington. Full dress, formal reception, the works." "Will media be there?" I asked. "Of course. You're the youngest woman ever promoted to Vice Admiral. It's a significant story." I thought about my family seeing news coverage of a promotion they'd never imagined possible. For years, they'd dismissed my career while I'd quietly built something extraordinary despite their lack of support. "Admiral," I said, "I'd like to request that the ceremony be private. Just family and close colleagues." Crawford raised an eyebrow. "Any particular reason?" "Because some victories are worth more when they're shared with people who actually understand their significance." That evening, I called Grandma Rose to share the news. Her response was exactly what I'd hoped for. "Oh, darling, I'm so proud of you, but I've been proud since the day you chose to serve something bigger than yourself. Even when Dad thought I was wasting my life? Especially then. It takes real courage to stay true to your calling when the people you love most can't see its value." I looked out at the fleet under my command. Destroyers, cruisers, submarines, aircraft carriers, each one representing thousands of sailors whose safety was now my responsibility. "Grandma, do you think Dad understands now what I actually do?" "I think your father understands that he spent 20 years looking at the wrong daughter when he wanted to see real achievement," she replied. "But, more importantly, I think you understand that his opinion was never what mattered." She was right. The family that had once called me jobless now knew I commanded one of the most powerful naval forces in the world. But their recognition felt less important than it once had. Sometimes the greatest victory isn't proving doubters wrong, it's realizing you no longer need their validation to know your worth. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.